You are listening to Sex Afflictions and Porn Addictions. I am your host, Craig Pera, and this is a podcast to help you create healthy sexuality and a great life. And the reason why we focus on those two things, because in order to create healthy sexuality, which means control one of the most powerful forces in human nature, and to counter the default, which is lying about some aspect of our sexual expression and pleasure, that is literally our oldest and most impactful habit when you really think about it. And that's powerful. Okay, that's not an excuse. That doesn't justify anything that we men have done, but it is a reality. Today we're going to talk about techniques that it's either alleged that these therapists performed, and we're going to talk about two therapists that were recently arrested, and both of these two therapists had a significant porn addiction practice. Both are from Utah. The first therapist was Maurice Wade Harker. He was charged with aggravated abuse of a vulnerable adult and kidnapping. He was abusing the patient in session, it is alleged. The other person, you probably heard about this, Jody Hildebrandt. She was the therapist arrested in connection with mom influencer Ruby Frank. I'm not going to get into the facts of these cases. One thing I'd like to say first is that everything in this broadcast is referencing published allegations, and everything in here, the text, what I'm saying is my opinion. Everyone has the right to the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Jody Hildebrandt recently surrendered her mental health license, so that tells you something. This information is for educational purposes only, and designed to help you make educated and informed decisions about who is going to help you break free and stay free from sex and porn addiction, because there's a lot of garbage out there. There's a lot of garbage. There's a lot of dangerous advice. And I'm going to highlight 5 techniques that are alleged to have been used in this case or in other cases, that I invite you to say, wait a minute, if this is me, am I in the right place? So it is alleged that Jody Hildebrandt breached patient confidentiality and discussed the patient's alleged porn addiction with university staff, BYU university staff, other mental health professionals, and other individuals. So here's the lesson that I want you to think about. If your provider is telling you to disclose your deepest, darkest secrets to anyone but your wife, that is a flag. That can be dangerous. It can be terribly unhealthy, and suggests that the provider that you're using is using shame to drive compliance. While shame can be an effective compliance mechanism, but only for a short time. And the aggregate effect of using shame actually causes more harm. So if your provider, therapist, counselor, or coach is encouraging you to disclose personal information to your employer, to your children, to your parents, to friends for the purposes of embarrassing you into compliance, that, my dear friends, is dangerous, and you should seriously consider working with someone else. That's number one. Number two, here's another yellow flag, and that is when your provider, coach, therapist, or counselor is encouraging you to kill that part of you, to kill the addict part, destroy the addict part. What that person is doing is putting you in a perpetual conflict with yourself. Remember this rule, man. Please, you will always lose in a fight against yourself. And we're going to come back to this later when we get to the demonology portion of this program. But if your provider is encouraging you to kill that part of you, destroy that part of you, that person is encouraging you to kill you, to kill that part of you is you. So that can be very, very, very dangerous. The third factor that I also believe is a yellow flag is when your provider is imposing their version of healthy sexuality on you. If there's only one way to do healthy sexuality, here's my expression: hit the highway. And the reason for that is because we are all so unique. And it is so important for the provider to embrace that uniqueness and recognize, particularly around sex, what's great for one person is causing harm for the other. What's a wonderful expression of love and connection for one couple is triggering a core wound in another. It is very important that your provider not define for you what healthy sexuality is, but you define what healthy sexuality is. You define what works well for you. Okay. In a recent example of this, I heard a provider recently telling a couple on a video, a live video, that they should not record each other on the phone. And neither person, to my knowledge, was struggling with sex addiction or porn addiction. It was a general question: hey, is this healthy? The answer is, it depends. The answer should never be, oh, that's bad. Now, there are some things and there are lines, but I need you to know that it's up to you to create your healthy sexuality. And if someone is imposing their will, that's a flag. That's a warning sign. Okay. That means that that person doesn't have tolerance and understanding of human sexuality, that doesn't understand the spectrum of human pleasure. What's great for one person is not great for someone else. And it is very important for a provider to recognize that. Now, if you join me late, don't worry. I'm going to do a quick recap before. And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. And that way, at the end, I'll get to your questions. So, so far, well, I'll do the recap later. The fourth factor that I think, it is my opinion, that is also a yellow flag is when the therapist, counselor, or coach is demanding compliance with their version of spirituality and or God. For example, the allegations against Jody were that, one, she didn't want you to talk to anyone else about your problem. Started to feel cult-like. And what was happening here is that there was only one version of spirituality. So the therapist wasn't in the role of the therapist was in the role of the spiritual advisor. And brothers and sisters, that can be a very dangerous combination, merging those two skills. The allegations of Jody was that she pedestalized herself. She cloaked herself with the church in a way that her words of advice and counsel weren't just words of advice of counsel, they were coming from God. That's not therapy, that's a cult. Okay, so if your therapist is demanding compliance with their version of spirituality and their version of God, respectfully, it is my opinion that that's not therapy, that's a cult. Okay, and earlier we talked about the yellow flag or yellow card, as we say in soccer, of a provider, therapist, counselor, or coach that is trying to get you to kill that addict part of you. Here's what happens in some religious therapist offices. Fortunately, that is a very narrow window. Most people out there are trying to do the best job they can and certainly aren't poisoning their clients like it is alleged that these two therapists did. Here's a major, major, major problem. When the therapist is invoking demons and the devil, and the therapist becomes an exorcist, if you will, that's dangerous. Respectfully, that is unethical. And it represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the human condition. And let me explain. So when your therapist convinces you that a demon is, you're possessed by a demon, which obviously is not in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders in this country, for obviously good reason. Hopefully, most of you are listening to this are saying, duh, Craig, obviously these are red flags, but here's the problem. And I know I'm talking to a very narrow group of people. I tried to make these podcasts accessible to as many people as possible. I know in this one, I'm only talking to a narrow window of people. And that's okay, because if this is you, if your therapist is trying to exorcise your demons respectfully, that represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how the devil works, first of all. Second of all, that's not his or her role. That's for the minister, that's for the priest, that's for the temple leader, whatever. That is not that person's role. And the more and better you understand parts work, the internal family systems model that many of you have heard me talk about, the more you understand the principles from the Pixar movie Inside Out. And if you remember that movie, right, this girl had all these different characters in her head. Okay. If your therapist is demonizing one of those characters, it means they don't understand parts work. It means that they don't understand addiction. It means they don't understand identity. And it means they are likely making it worse. Leave the devil, leave the demons to your spiritual advisor. I have yet to hear a client come to me and tell me that that line of therapy actually helped. A cornerstone of these types of unethical practices is this. So the umbrella under which all this sits under is shame. If your therapist, counselor, or coach is leveraging shame to drive compliance, you might be in the wrong place. Here's the last one. Here's number 6. I run a core training program. It's $500 for the 16-week program, 3 monthly payments of $185. And listeners to this podcast, by the way, get 36% off if you use the coupon code podcast. How was that? I snuck in the commercial there. I recently surveyed the guys in that program, and I said, how many of you are working with or have worked with a therapist or counselor? And 3/4 of them said yes. I asked them, how many of your therapist, counselor, or coach have led you to believe that beating your sex and porn addiction is easy? Now, I didn't expect these results. As I'm learning more and more about Jody and about Maurice, the 2 therapists that were fired, I know therapists who've worked with their clients. I've got an inside scoop on their methodology because of that. And I'm keeping my ear to the ground and listening to the allegations that other therapists or counselors are and clients are alleging about these 2. More and more people are coming out of the woodwork. I asked these guys, how many of you, raise your hand if your therapist, counselor, or coach led you to believe that beating sex and porn addiction was easy? Friends who are watching, members of the pack to feed the right wolf, who are watching, almost all of them said yes. Almost every single one of them said yes. My provider led me to believe that beating my sex and porn addiction, forget about creating healthy sexuality, is easy. If anyone is telling you this is easy, you are being grossly misled, profoundly misled. And anybody who's been following me for the past decade knows I don't come out swinging. I try not to be a sensationalist. But brothers and sisters, I know we got partners who are listening too. Um, it's not easy. And any provider who led you to believe that it was easy doesn't know what they're talking about, doesn't understand the complexity of the human condition, doesn't understand what wires together, fires together. And the reality is, and again, not an excuse, but you got to understand the scope of the problem that you were trying to fix. On the contrary, I want to tell you, anybody who's gotten that advice that this is easy, I am sorry, it is not. Joining this club, the aggressive pursuit of a great life, feeding the right wolf, creating healthy sexuality, it is going to be one of the hardest things that you ever do. One, it is one of the most powerful forces in human nature, period, bar none. It has built empires and it has destroyed lives. Our sexual energy is powerful. It leads to a great relationship or destroys that relationship. People feel great about themselves, or if you're listening to this, you certainly likely appreciate the depths of the shame. It is not easy. In fact, check this out. I believe that hiding, lying around some aspect of your sexual expression is literally your oldest and most impactful habit. And I invite everybody listening right now to put in the chat, rack your brain, and give me an older and more impactful habit than you hiding touching yourself. Mom, I brushed my teeth. Mom, I comb my hair. Mom, look. Come on. Put that away. Stop doing that. Bad boy. Shame. Dirty. Disgusting. The lying about it, men, is the default. Lying about your using sex, using pleasure to minimize pain is the default. So we're talking about your oldest and most impactful habit. So if you're working with someone who does not appreciate that reality or is leading you to believe that this is easy, well, what happens when you realize it's not easy? What happens? You feel like a worthless piece of crap. It's me. It's got to be me. She says it's easy, or he says it's easy. It's not easy for me. What does that make me bad? It reinforces the identity, the negative identity that is at the root of the problem to begin with. It reinforces that negative belief system that lies at the root of this problem, and that is I am unlovable, I am not worthy, I am not good enough. That is the cycle that you have to break. So if someone has led you to believe that this is easy, that's a red card. We got yellow cards. That's a red card to me because it represents a fundamental misunderstanding of human sexuality, human behavior, habits, what wires together, fires together, how old this habit is, how impactful this habit is, how long it's been going on. And again, please, this isn't an excuse. I'm not making excuse for men who have failed to live up to that higher standard that they're setting for themselves. So let me recap. Let me recap and share with you some yellow flags, yellow cards, and some red cards if you're working with a therapist, counselor, or coach. One red flag is that the provider is telling you to tell people like your boss, like your children, like your friends, like your parents about your sins, your shameful behavior in order to bring you into the light. Expose yourself to everyone. That is asinine. People get fired for stuff like this. If your provider is using shame to drive compliance, to me, that's a red flag. Number two, if your provider is encouraging you to kill the part of you that we call addict here, if using the internal family systems, that represents a significant misunderstanding of parts work and the reality that what you resist persists, and you will always lose in a fight against yourself. So that is a yellow or red, depending upon how egregious it is. Third is your provider should be helping you create healthy sexuality. If they are imposing their version of sexuality on you, here's my expression: if there's only one way, then hit the highway. These are complicated issues that require individualized attention, and everybody's definition of healthy sexuality may be different. And there's a difference between sharing options and imposing. Here's another aspect. The fourth thing that I want to mention is if your provider is demanding compliance with their version of spirituality in God, when your therapist, counselor, or coach assumes the role of prophet or spiritual leader, that's not therapy, that's a cult. There is a commingling of disciplines that ultimately may cause serious harm. Last but not least, if your provider is invoking demons, if your provider is claiming that you are possessed, that is a fundamental, again, misunderstanding of parts work. You will always lose in a fight against yourself. And one of the things that I love is my clients who are religious, and a lot of them are, have come to understand their version of faith. They're not, the person is not possessed by the devil. The devil is making them hate themselves, right? Or the devil is that negative, is making them believe their negative thoughts, right? The solution is loving every part of you, every cell, every space between cell, every mistake, every jiggly part of your belly, every broken part of your shoulder, a neck that can't turn any more than 25 degrees each direction. You get the point. The goal is self-care, because it's either self-care or it's self-harm. It's one or the other. Self-care and self-love. And if your provider is claiming that you're possessed by demons, not only is that egregious and a violation of their standards and norm, and is likely actionable on their license, meaning that someone could bring a case and it is possible, as was done here, that their person's license could be in jeopardy. The last thing I want to say is the sixth point is, and we've got a brother in the chat, 1,000% not easy. He knows firsthand. Thank you for sharing that, Fugi. Is if your therapist, provider, or coach is telling you that this is easy, that's a red flag. That's a run for the hills. It is not easy. The aggressive pursuit of a great life is one of the most difficult things that you will ever do, period. For me, brothers and sisters, the mindful habit, or whatever path you're on, this is choosing hard. It is one of my favorite expressions. Me, when I was obese at 250 plus pounds, that was hard. The impact on my joints, the swelling, the arthritis, the cortisol, the shame, the physiology of fear, the stress, the depression, the addictions, the firings, the almost losing my marriage, being a shitty father. That's hard. That was miserable, man. I can't imagine anything harder. But you know what also is hard? The aggressive pursuit of a great life. And once you accept that reality and you learn to embrace the suck, and you learn that it is hard, it's supposed to be hard, life is it's just the way it is, you have an incredible and deep appreciation for when things aren't hard. Oh God, when I'm in that, oh, I like, so, oh, how wonderful. How wonderful. It's medium hard right now. I've got a few challenges that I'm working through, but I promise they will not suck me in. I will not identify by those challenges. I'm not going to get swept out to sea by them. I'm going to manage them responsibly in a healthy and constructive way. And that's what I want for you. This is not easy. So, in conclusion, what I expressed here is my opinion. Everything I said regarding these two therapists are allegations, and everyone has the right to be presumed innocent unless proven guilty. Although we do know that Jody Hildebrandt, within the past couple of days, surrendered her mental health license, so she is no longer authorized to practice. She had a provisional license that almost got suspended. Anyway, she got to keep it, and now it's gone. So it's important for you to find a provider who is going to lift you up, to help you not make it worse. And if any of the factors that I discussed today are present, there is a chance that you are in an environment that is making things worse. Thank you so much for listening. It is a great honor. We're coming up on our 11th year helping people. So it's been just an amazing journey. And I want to thank everyone for listening. It's better because of you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Don't forget, if you need additional help, reach out, visit the website, mindfulhabithelp.com. And that way you can learn more about us and get extra help if you need it. Thanks for listening, everybody. And I hope no one's in this situation, but if you are, I hope you find the courage to take the steps to address these issues so you can be your best self. Why? Life is too short to suck. All right, everybody, have a great week.